Welcome, everybody. We are undergoing an experiment here today. We are going to be discussing with a group of eminent transhumanists, mainly from the UK, but some from further afield, whether it makes sense for us to do something in the lead up to the UK general election, which is going to be taking place in May of next year. Should we be creating some transhumanist policies, and should we be even trying to influence what politicians are thinking and what politicians are saying? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to briefly show a few slides which set the context. Here we go. So we're talking about the possibilities of a general election. I'm going to need to mute somebody. Somebody's feed is coming through to the front. It seems to be fixed now. Right, so Transhumanist Declaration for the UK. And we're going to be sharing some text from the latest version of this declaration, which is version 0.14, which has moved on a lot in the last couple of days, in fact, even in the last few hours. I posed a whole bunch of questions beforehand of things I believe need discussion. But to simplify it, I'm not going to look at these 10 questions. I will, however, ask all of the panelists in turn to answer 2 questions. And the first question is, what do they think may be missing or not emphasized enough or needing more priority in the current approach? What are the opportunities for us to do things better than has been brainstormed already over the last day or so? Once we've had that discussion with each person on the panel is chipping in, I'll ask the question, what do you particularly like about the current approach? So that even if we're changing lots of other things, this is the focus, this is the most important thing you believe needs to be preserved. The document that I've prepared, with lots of input from many people, thanks for all that, has a context. It talks about, first of all, the technology is accelerating, converging, and disrupting, and that most people have little idea of what changes will be possible within the next 5 to 10 years. Therefore, most policymakers stand to be surprised again and again. So we urge that people think in advance about what these technological changes will enable. And then there's a context of transhumanism, where we say that the basic philosophy of transhumanism is to embrace technological changes, to give us more freedoms and give us more opportunities, but we have to do it wisely and thoughtfully. That's the context. And then the document currently lists transhumanist policy areas broken down into 9 headings, which you can see there: action for healthy longevity, basic income guarantee, reform of laws governing drugs and therapies, actions to reduce existential risks, more focus on educating people to think hard and seriously about the future, reform of intellectual property law, reform of democratic processes, a bunch of things to do with human and non-human rights, and then at the end, a section on covering the costs of the new initiatives, because if we want to do more things, we have to state how we think these things can be paid. So that's my introduction, and by the way, I'm David Wood. I'm one of the directors of the International Humanity Plus organization, but I'm doing this initiative along with others in this group as part of a possible new UK transhumanist party. So I'm now going to turn the floor over to Darren Reynolds for his comments. Darren has a significant background in politics, which maybe you can explain and then give your comments, Darren. And you're on mute.
There we go. We got some audio?
Fantastic.
Yep.
Great. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, David, is thank you very, very much for doing all of the work, and all of the other contributors as well for getting us this far. I think that what has already been done is fantastic. I'm almost loath to make any criticism of it, really, because what's been done is to such an excellent high standard. My own thoughts. Well, first of all, as far as the timetable is concerned, we're talking about the possibility of doing things in time for the 2015 general election. I think it's worth noting that all the major political parties have already got their manifestos in place. Their platforms are fixed, and they're not going to change to any significant extent between now and 2015. However, individual candidates, and to some extent incumbent MPs, can be persuaded to make statements. So if we feel that we have a particular simple message that we want to put to the candidates to say, do you support this? Are you prepared to support this as an individual? Then I think there is a strong possibility of being able to get support, if only for the reason that all candidates and incumbent MPs like to get any additional publicity. So if somebody thinks that you're going to be publishing their thoughts on a particular subject and getting them out to an audience with their name on it, then they're going to give you an answer. So I do think it's worth speaking to the candidates and MPs individually in time for 2015. Longer term, of course, we've got the opportunity to influence what the major parties do in 2020 and between now and 2020, and that is completely up for grabs. There's plenty of time for doing that, and it starts immediately after the general election. So then on to the content, the policies that are already in the document. Just a statement of interest so that you're all aware. I am a trustee of the SENS Foundation, so please bear in mind that anything I say, I have that connection, so be aware of that. Obviously, I'm going to absolutely support what we're seeking to do as far as technological development around medicine, health, combating aging, the funding that we're proposing to put into research into aging, treating aging as a disease rather than treating all the diseases individually. It strikes me as well, though, that one of the arguments in favour of doing that was missing from the document that I read, which is this idea that as people get older, you've got people who are at the peak of their skill set. The information that's packed into their heads, the skills that are packed into people's heads, is right at a peak at exactly the time when we take people out of the economic engine room. We send people off to retirement because their lives, the length of their lives is limited. So we miss this opportunity to keep people economically active when they've got all of those skills. And Aubrey's facts and figures charts do, I think, very persuasively demonstrate how any investment that goes into combating aging only has to show a very modest level of return. It only has to achieve very, very modest things in order to have a massive impact, value-wise, across the whole of the global economy. So I think we should add some of those facts and figures in that section. I've got a question that I hope somebody might be able to address about the UBI, which is one of the challenges that will be put to us is if everybody has a basic income, if everybody can be comfortably at home, perhaps doing some learning or perhaps just tending to their gardens, who are the nurses and who are the teachers? How do you motivate people to carry on with those kinds of jobs? I also wonder whether we've got anything to say about the divide between the wealthy and the poor. So one concern I had, therapies for enhancement, for example. Of course, we all want to have therapies for enhancement. I'll be first in the queue, I can assure you of that. But isn't that going to increase the scale and the quality of the divisions in society? We might say, well, there's always been divisions. There's always been wealthy and poor. But, you know, out there, people are wanting to see a reduction in the division between the wealthy and poor. There's this thing about the 1% and the 99%, or even the 0.1% and the 99.9%. And isn't there a risk that once you start to permit therapies for enhancement, that you're going to increase that divide? Because the first enhancement that anybody's going to want is they want to be able to think smarter, work smarter, be more economically effective, and that's just going to extend the divide. So I'm interested in what people have to say about that. The final thing I've got on my set of notes that I'd like to bring up for discussion is the dignity in dying movement. So going through Parliament over the last few months has been this question about affording people dignity in dying so that they're able to choose the time and manner of the way that they die. That overlaps hugely with the question of cryonics. So maybe people would like to choose a method of dying which in law it qualifies as death but is simply being cryonically suspended. So that overlap there I think is a great opportunity for doing some work over the course of the next few months between now and the 2015 general election, simply because it's a hot topic.
Darren, that's a fantastic set of feedback. I think most of the points you raised are supporting what we've got in the document and just saying we need to flesh them out. And indeed, the goal is that each of the sections of the document, if we decide to keep them, will become larger, and they'll be backed up by other evidence. And when we write this other evidence, which answers hopefully the question about who will be the nurses, I think that's a great question. But when we have answers to these, then we can then elevate some material from that document and put it into the surface.
Perhaps I should just take the opportunity, David, to specifically address the questions that you asked. So, is there anything that I think should be removed? No.
Yep.
Is there anything obvious that I think is missing? No, although it would be interesting to see how the discussion goes. What about the order that they're in? I think there will be some, we'll all have opinions on that as the dialogue continues, I think. Probably I might change the order, but let's have a more broad conversation about it before trying to be too specific. But overall, you're quite right, David. Yes, I'm very supportive of everything you've put together so far.
Fantastic. Let's go to Alexander Karan. You've been one of the people. You've been one of the people who've helped to write the document. What's your views on things that might need more emphasis or might need changing?
Following on from Darren, tough act to follow, really. On the document itself, I'm more than happy with the way things are going. I think the language could use a bit more zing and gravitas, you know, just in terms of political speak. And I think the educational issue section needs a little bit of work. I see, obviously, one of the recent additions was the MOOC, massively online open online courses. I would, similar to what's in the document, I'd like this to be like basically fleshed out in terms of innovative pedagogical models. I also believe that, like, education in terms of what we need, things are moving forwards. AI is obviously coming to the fore. Human intellectual capital is losing speed, or may lose speed as AI becomes more advanced. Certainly, if it approaches AGI, that we need to basically change teaching methods. You know, to be more non-judgmental. I'm just thinking of examples that I've lived with so far, and that, like, teachers tend to be judgmental, children tend to be like pigeonholed very quickly. The MOOC methodology and maybe some narrow AI like type of things would like broaden that out. So, you know, obviously the educational reform side of things, just open it up a little bit.
Technology provides many opportunities to improve how we're doing education.
Yeah.
Other parties are talking about that, but we have a particular insight, and so.
Yeah, I believe we could be strong there.
Right.
The longevity and drug reforms, to me, seem to be two strands of the same issue. Obviously, longevity, we all want it. I certainly want it. As per Darren, I mean, I will be in the queue, and I will obviously sell organs and then regenerate them to get said medicine. But the actual drug reform, the whole, I mean, the way it's put in the document, I'm not sure how we'd approach this, because obviously it would be a very hot potato in a political sense. Certainly in terms of I mean, cognitive enhancements, we can all see a benefit towards that. The more hedonistic aspects of drug taken, I'm not too sure whether we should touch it or not. However, others may have like different opinions on the matter. And that's roughly where I'm at, how I feel about the document in general. I mean, I think it's going well. 10 issues, I think, is roughly the maximum we should be trying to deal with, and obviously fleshing them out somewhat. On the longevity things, I mean, we've had discussions on the document about where we should head, and it tends to tally with what Darren said in terms of the longevity dividend and specific aims like reducing dementia, healthy longevity. Obviously, we all want expanded lifespans, but if I could live to 100 and be healthy for those whole 100 years, I will be semi-happy with that. And
great.
Everyone else will.
Many thanks, Alexander. So I'll look to you in taking the lead on some of the educational stuff, and I take your point that maybe some of the stuff about mind-expanding drugs is quite controversial, and we'll look forward to hearing what other people have got to say. Let's turn to Amnen. You're also inside the educational world, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
What's your views on the document and on the whole approach to trying to influence politics in the next few months?
I have 1 minute, do I?
Well, the others seem to have stretched their minute quite a long way. So, but you're a professional lecturer, so you can do it.
Well, I want to first of all reiterate, Darren. It's it's a fantastic initiative and just in time. And I was very interested to hear what Darren has to say about it. If we want to approach it politically. So, the manifesto is the manifesto, as I saw it, seemed to have to combine several purposes. I mean, one is maybe to consolidate the transhumanist idea in the UK. The other one has to do with the elections. So, as a political statement, I also again agree with Darren, which has to do something with focusing the intent and trying to stand out while not letting the debate be overtaken. Sorry, the public debate be overtaken by what we will end up finding is red herrings, like a drug reform, basic income. I don't know what would end up being a red herring, but maybe there are things that we want to be first identified with, as in prioritize. Regarding the question you asked, how do we prioritize? I think make an MP make a statement. The questions of healthy longevity. That's probably Darren again made Darren made again an excellent point about that.
So you're agreeing that should be the top priority?
I agree that this is an excellent way, one out of others, to make us stand out first of all, and to separate the ideas that we want to be identified with from those we believe in, but they're not the first thing we want people to think of when we say transhumanist ideas. One is extending longevity. I think existential risk is something that is in the news, and politically we may and perhaps should ride the wave.
Yeah, so the question is, what do we say about existential risks? And
I made some notes, but then I would be exceeding my...
Well, the point is to raise a few topics, and then we'll continue the discussion in the document and elsewhere. So I'm getting feedback that you really like the longevity stuff and you like the existential risks being there. I mean, you are also the co-author, the editor of the whole book on the singularity hypothesis, so you've got a lot to say about that particular risk. The question is what else we should say about some of the other risks, whether climate change or anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So climate change is definitely an existential risk. So I think that we want to think about the format and the contents and the size. So, for example, is it a one-page? Something that executive summary.
I think we need an executive summary. We need something that will fit basically on a page or a page and a half, but we also need the next level down at least, and possibly the next level down after that, when people say, are you guys serious? So
yeah, well, there are some white papers around. So, for example, we don't need to add anything new to the AI being existential risk. There is considerable work. So we just, instead of writing a new white paper, we can just have a pointer to whatever exists.
Okay, many thanks, Amnen. You get a chance to say some more in a minute. I'd like to turn to Durk Brewer. Durk has past of creating political parties in exactly this space, maybe more than once. So Durk, what do you think about this? Third time lucky?
Probably not. I'm not very optimistic about a transhumanist party actually going anywhere, at least in the next 10 years, but it will almost certainly raise the profile of transhumanism. I would think that if you approached 100 random people in the street, you'd be lucky if maybe 40 of them had heard the word, and you'd be lucky if 5 of them could define it. So I think the idea that we can get people to understand what the possibilities are is probably what's going to come out of this and be the most valuable product. But having said that, going back to the potential manifesto, one of the things that wasn't really well spelled out is what is the position, our position on direct democracy and referenda.
Do you have strong views on that? Is that something that should be covered?
I've got two views. One's practical and one's more kind of ideological. I believe in the decentralization and the distribution of power to the lowest level, and especially when decisions are going to affect a lot of people's lives, they should have a say in it, not just electing somebody who can then override their wishes. From a practical point of view, it's our kind of get out of jail free card, because as soon as people start bringing up, should we join the euro, should we be in or out of the EU, what about immigration? If you're in favour of a referenda after presenting the evidence, then I think that will kill the conversation from their end, because as soon as you start talking about things like that within what is essentially a one-issue party, you're going to get a lot of division.
Okay, so when you're raising the point we need to think about the democracy section, there is a section in the document saying we should be reforming democracy. We haven't reached any views there as to how referendum might be used and how the electorate may be able to overrule the decisions of the voters who we voted for previously.
Yeah, I mean, typically in Britain, referenda have been distinctly frowned upon. I think there's only been one in my lifetime, which was the whether to join the European Community. I may be wrong on that, but I can't remember any others. And certainly a lot of policies have been pushed through against the will of the British people over a long period of time. I think that's why we're seeing things like UKIP arising and the instability in the current system.
Okay, so we need more work on that democratic section, and maybe you will contribute some thoughts to that offline. Thanks, Dirk. Let's try and get round the whole of the panel. We'll have a chance to chat later. I want to come next to Julian. So Julian has another long history. Julian Snape has another long history in the transhumanism in the UK. Julian, are you inspired by this opportunity, and what do you think we should be changing?
I'm definitely inspired by it. I really do like what I've seen, but codicil to that, a bit like Dirk, I've seen this all before over the last 20 years or so, where we've got a good amount of momentum going, and then it's all fizzled. Now, I reckon we're here really because of what Zoltan has done in the States, where he's obviously set up the US Transhumanist Party, and because he's intending to run for president, he's suddenly got a lot of publicity going. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. Probably a good thing. At least any publicity is good publicity. But I'm just wondering whether we ought to be thinking more along those sort of lines. It seems to be going back now to a little bit of what we've always been trying to do, which is to become a sort of think tank trying to influence other parties. But I think Zoltan is getting his publicity because he's actually going to be running for president. So whether we could translate something, it's a bit late now for the 2015s, but into having even just one candidate somewhere, maybe for a London constituency, whether that might give us more publicity. Other than that, I think it might just fizzle again if we're not very careful.
So we may need to find something intermediate beyond just chatting and creating documents and trying to get somebody to become the Prime Minister. And perhaps we should organise a series of meetings, big meetings. And I quite like to organise a meeting in maybe February or March, in which we invite the public and in which we have 9 speakers covering the 9 areas of the manifesto. Perhaps
that sounds like a good idea. Definitely. I'm just thinking not necessarily for Prime Minister, but even just having one candidate going for a high-profile constituency. Whether we could afford to do that, I think it's only £500, isn't it, to put up for the actual deposit. Whether that will give us any more publicity, and also it'll get us thinking more politically than we've ever done before.
Okay, so we need to figure out what's an intermediate next step.
Yeah.
Creating document as a start, what other goals would we have? Perhaps being on various TV programs, perhaps being invited to other people's events, and other people do organize events about the future, and ideally there should be some of us there saying, hey, I hear there's this thing called the Transhumanist Manifesto, it seems a bit interesting, what would you like to say about that? That will get us a bit more publicity.
And we probably need to have a little bit of media savvy and media training as well. So we're sat in front of the likes of, I know Paxman's now gone, isn't he, from Newsnight, but we've got people like Eddie Mayer on today and so forth, and they're pretty hard cutting if we ever start to sit in front of those sort of people.
I think Durk can give us some practice interviews. He can pretend to be Jeremy Paxman and grill all of us, and then the rest of us will have to be in our best form. Thanks, Julian. I'm going to move on, if I may, to Amnen Twimman. Amnen is very energetically behind this initiative. The two of us were chatting just 3 days ago, and it seems to have grown quite well since then. So what would you like to see changed or emphasized, or what would you like to keep the same, Amnen?
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks for everything. I'd just like to say that overall I agree emphatically with pretty much everything that I've heard so far, although most of the points that I'm particularly interested in tonight came from Darren and from Julian. But so positive things so far. I would say I like that we keep hearing a focus on longevity. I think it's the one, regardless of whether anyone's particularly interested in it personally, I think it's the one thing pretty much all transhumanists can agree they have in common. So no matter what they feel divides them from each other, it's this common meme, and it's also, luckily, something that allows us to connect to the concerns of real people out there. So I think putting longevity front and center is important. That does put us in an interesting position regarding existing groups like the Longevity Party, who I haven't really been following how they've been doing lately, but that's just a question to consider another day. And it'll come up with my other point in a moment. As for what I would change or emphasize or develop further, people who know what I'm interested in know that a core thing for me is the social questions. So how society is impacted by these various technologies, questions of social justice, that kind of thing. I think it's really important that we make that relatively central, but I think that that's implicit in a lot of the points we've already got in the Declaration. So that's absolutely fine. But it does make me think of a few things that I think it's worth just mentioning for the moment. One is that I don't want to go on about this at length, but the moment I started saying, oh, I'm behind this Transhumanist Party idea that Zoltan's been promoting, immediately people started coming out of the woodwork arguing over whether it was going to be a predominantly libertarian or socialist party. And I think I must have used the word neither about 800 times in the last day. It's tricky, but what that really brought home to me, to agree with what a couple of people said, is that I think initially it's important to stick to a tight remit. So, you know, I think it was Alexander who was saying that, you know, 10 points or so is about as far as you want to be extended for a one-issue party, especially initially. So I'm really pleased with that. I do think we need to, and on just finally on this question of if we're talking about a party or an alliance or a think tank or whatever, I do think I personally think we are talking about a party, because transhumanism already has a network of think tanks, and some of them are pretty effective at what they do, and they represent sort of a range of transhumanist thought. So a lot of the ideas that we've got were kind of pre-chewed by these think tanks over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I think as long as we can draw on those existing institutions and make use of the thought they've already put in, the guys at Oxford and IET and so on, as long as we can draw on that political philosophy and those policy ideas, then I don't think we need another think tank right now. And the question of if this is a party, I think exactly as Julian says, this has come about because of what Zoltan's been doing. And like Dirk, I've got to admit, I was initially extremely skeptical. Apologies to Zoltan if you're watching Zoltan. I said as much to him, I was really skeptical about the value of a transhumanist party, because transhumanists have so many different views on anything remotely political. and that a lot of transhumanists just don't like politics whatsoever. But I think we've seen from groups like the Greens, the Pirate parties, and others that you can focus on like say these 10 points, and you can really get some traction. So my very last point, and I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of days, and I really like what Julian was saying about how we should try to have a figurehead, sort of our own Zoltan. We should put up a candidate for something, possibly, probably London-based, possibly even the London Assembly, as opposed to an MP or a councillor or something. And I wouldn't expect anyone to decide while we're chatting here, but I would personally encourage that maybe David were chair of the new organisation and a potential candidate. It's just a discussion to have, because I think David does an excellent job of, as Darren said, putting these ideas together professionally, communicating them in a way that people can relate to, while managing to pack in a lot more nuance than I would expect from a lot of other people, like kind of details that transhumanists fret over. A lot of it's still in there, despite it being broadly accessible. It does, as Alexander was saying, it does need to be turned into public language, given a bit more zing and so on. But anyway, yeah. So broadly, I like to focus on longevity. Emphasis-wise, I think the social question, by drawing on different political philosophies expressed through a transhumanist party, that's what I think we should be doing.
Many thanks, Eamon. I think I'll quickly move over the suggestion of running for a seat on the London Assembly. I'll have to figure out how that might work. I think I have to nominate you to stand in a seat for the Liverpool Assembly. I don't know. See how it works. Now, we've got a couple of members of the panel who actually are not from the UK. We've got Michael Hrenka, who is from Germany. We're going to hear from in a moment, and then we're going to pass on to Valdemar Ingdahl from Sweden. Before we do that, I just draw everybody's attention to the fact that there is a Q&A facility in this Hangout. You can get to it on the right-hand side of your screens. If you're looking at it and you're seeing something there called Showcase instead, you can change it from that showcase into the Q&A by clicking, this is for people outside the panel, clicking on the little 3x3 grid, and it'll bring down a menu that lets you swap into Q&A mode. And there are some good questions and comments in there from people like Chris Montero, Mark Larkento, and Didier Cournell, and we'll come to some of these questions and comments in a minute. Other audience members, if you feel like you want to help out in choosing between these questions, then give a +1 vote to them, and that will help us to know which ones to look at first. So having said that, I'd like to come to Michael, and you're not going to be a candidate for any UK position soon, but as an interesting observer from outside, I wonder what you think of this initiative that we're doing in the UK. You have to come off mute. I can hear you now. No. Great.
So thank you for inviting me. Well, there are a lot of points I want to talk about. First of all, my general impression is rather positive. I think we need to discuss the details, but the general direction is very good, so keep it up. But I think we should be clear about what's the purpose of all of this. So what do we want to achieve? Do we want to just get publicity or really change something in politics? And yeah, what clear goals do we have? Do we have a clear priority of goals, or do we just try to do everything at once, more or less, and see what works?
So my answer to that is I want other politicians to adopt our manifesto ideas, and I want to see them put into place. I really do want to see other parties campaigning for example, extra funding for longevity research. That's what my goal is. And we should break that down. I think you're right. We need to break it down into intermediate steps, what we'd like to see in terms of at least some candidates. I mean, it's been suggested we can get some candidates for constituency positions to include some of our ideas in the speeches they make, or maybe they can give us sentences or paragraphs supporting it. That's a step in the right direction. But you're right to ask, what's the longer-term goal? And my view is the longer-term goal is that all these policies will be implemented.
Yeah, great. But if we want to have candidates, we need volunteers first, and optimally volunteers with a lot of time and competence in politics, ideally. I don't know how realistic that is at this point in time.
I want to influence candidates from other parties. I want to influence the candidates from the Conservatives, the Liberals, and Labour, and Scottish Nationalists, Green, UKIP, whatever. I want all of them to pick up our ideas. And so I'm not proposing that we'll have a lot of people standing for election. I don't know whether we'll have anybody standing for election, even in local. But that's my personal vision. I think others will vary.
Good. And then there's the question, which organizations will support this declaration? Because if it's something that a few people throw out there, it won't stick. We need to support it with more activity. But let me first address an issue that's quite important, I think. It's the organization of this whole manifesto. How do we develop it? How do we discuss it? And I think we could use more and better technologies for that. For example, we could use bulletin boards for discussion, or a real wiki on which we can edit the declaration collaboratively. Perhaps the IET will lend us their wiki for that.
That sounds good. We should ask them. I think they've got good technology.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to share a link. I've started a forum myself, and I've made a thread for discussing this manifesto openly.
Right, so this is in your Social Futurist forum?
It's the Social Futurist forum. It's very new and doesn't have a lot of activity yet.
So I'm copying that into the showcase. It's taking a few minutes to do that, so people watching can hopefully see that on the showcase carousel. Not sure it's popped up yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes,
that's
worked.
Great. A general comment I have on the manifesto so far is that there seem to be a few magic numbers in there, and I think if we use any numbers, there should be evidence that these numbers have any solid foundation in science or whatever. We just shouldn't imagine up any numbers.
Sure. So that would be backed up by the more detailed work, which I believe we can do. And in some cases, we will say we don't know what the number is, but we do think research needs to be done in an area.
Great. Now about the topics in detail. I think it's very important that we have human and animal rights in there, because this is a point that is quite underestimated in my opinion. It's not only because of the ethical issue. I'm a utilitarian myself, and I think it's very important to reduce global suffering as much as possible. But I think it's also coupled with existential threats. If humans keep on treating animals so badly as they do now, they will set a bad example for more intelligent beings that will come later this century, probably. Say super intelligent AGI, or any kind of uploaded beings which become powerful super post-humans. And this is important because if we set a bad example, they can say, look, what you have done with beings that are less intelligent than you, that gives me the ethical legitimation to do similar things with you. And I think that's a really terrifying thought, and it's rarely really discussed. So
you're giving you're giving a strong support for keeping that contentious phrase in the document, that we should have rights for animals as well as rights for humans. Okay, and maybe one more point, then we should move on.
Okay, the point about intellectual property.
Yes.
Maybe we could consider a more radical approach. Let's now say we want to reform intellectual property law or patent law, but actually replace it with something better, whatever that may be. We might consider alternatives. What I would propose is considering reputation economies. I've developed a reputation economy system. Okay, I can link that too. I've wrote a documentation on that system that I've developed. You can check out.
Okay. Why don't you give me that? Give me that in a moment, and I'll copy it in. I see it's there already. Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. So possibly doing something more radical on the intellectual property front.
Right.
It's all part of making technology free, in a sense, so making technology come up to its full limits. I'm sure there's scope for discussion on that. Many thanks, Michael. Let's move on, if you don't mind, to Valdemar, who also has a long history in different ways in advising politicians, advising people to how to work with politicians. What's your view on what you've heard, and what's your view on the whole proposals before us?
David, thank you for inviting me. I hope you all hear me okay. I come from an extropian libertarian side of transhumanism, and of course then it's some points here in this document that I have objections to, but that's not the interesting part of it, because there's always going to be objections. So I hope to contribute in a small way to, well, discussing how this document should be formulated, what parts should be in it to make a good effect. First of all, I think often of, come to think of it, James Hughes in his book Citizen Cyborg, where he noticed this a new political part of the political spectrum, namely this bio-liberal, bio-libertarian part, and there conservatives and progressives could find common ground, which they perhaps didn't find when discussing economics, etc. I think it's important to keep in mind that part of the spectrum when trying to get a broad statement. First of all, who is going to read the document? If I understand it correctly, this is going to be directed towards British parties, it's going to be directed towards Conservative MPs, it's going to be directed towards Labour MPs. I think it's important then to try to adapt the language, keeping wording general, trying to find new inputs in policy. For instance, if you're discussing the education system, well, it's good to talk about future studies, but perhaps trying to find an angle like, for instance, MOOC has been up in the discussion here, or the Khan Academy, and new forms of pedagogical ways of teaching to give students a broader set of tools, which of course is important in policy. I think it's important if you start to discuss points such as the basic income guarantees that you're going to have to word it differently if you're presenting it to politicians from different parties. I react strongly to the BIG, but when I start to consider it as a negative income tax from economist Milton Friedman, I think many libertarians, conservatives are more inclined to agree with it because they see a big welfare state that is being inefficient. So the wording would have to be different from each MP that you're trying to influence with the transhumanist idea. Some parts of policy, well, there you have to tread carefully. Is climate change an existential risk? Yes, you could say so, depending on your view on climate change, but actually another existential risk that is unlikely but possible is being hit by an asteroid. So you have to look up if this is going to be enrolled in a document that's going to explain a transhumanist point of view. And then I would go more for radical morphological freedom issues because it affects, in Britain, the NHS, and that's lots of money, lots of resources. It's an important policy issue. There you could discuss issues such as enhancement. You could tie them to policy issues such as harm reduction. Of course, weighting them a bit differently from who you're speaking to in the audience. And I think it's important, especially as you are forming a political party in Britain, to divide this. I know that David has written on, has addressed Rick Falkvinge, the Swedish ex-leader of the Swedish Pirate Party, and his book Swarmwise. And I think it's important to study the Pirate Party for its successes and its failures. But one thing that I think they did well was to divide the policy work in sort of a triangle. A pirate party, a pirate bay that was more activist, more flashy, more in the media's eye, that didn't have to be that deep, and they had sort of a think tank, the Pirate Bureau. And it's important to keep the various parts of policy in the right parts of this triangle, because if you start to talk policy-wise in politics, I really like that your English language has a division between politics and policy, because they are different on how you use various concepts. So keep policy generally with a general wording. Try to adapt it to who you're speaking to, particularly if you're going to address MPs and trying to influence them. Think broader. Politics today is much broader than political parties. Some NGOs might have even more influence in public life, so it could be important to address them too. And if you're going political and trying to get voters to vote for a transhumanist MP, well, then you should party program. And then you start to put in numbers. Numbers are put into white papers and to, well, what the candidate says, not in more general, tries to discuss policies in general.
Many thanks, Valdemar. As you've been talking, I see lots of the panelists nodding their heads and chatting away in background in agreement. I think that's very practical information, very practical advice. We thought the meeting might finish in an hour. We've already been going 49 minutes. There's quite a lot more that I think people would like to say. So what I propose, first of all, I'm going to read some of the questions from the Q&A list. Then I'm going to go around all the panelists in the same order as before and let them speak for 2 minutes max each. So I'll have to pull the plug if you go too far, on any topic that you feel deserves to be raised. Whether you're going to answer some of the questions from the Q&A or whether you've got other thoughts that you believe are the most important things to plant into the discussion now. So from the Q&A, Chris Montero points out it'll cost a £10,000 deposit to run for the London Assembly. So that's quite a lot of money. We have to think very hard before we do such a thing. Didier talks about why aren't you saying anything about space? You know, many people are excited by the idea of going into space. Should we have a section on that? Bruce Thompson suggests that we should be looking to get some of our ideas taken up, possibly by Hollywood producers. maybe not in time for this election, but possibly in time for our next election. If not Hollywood producers, then maybe other artists or other movie people could be doing that. Another question from Chris Montero, who says, look, the challenge is in transforming the H+ movement to an activist organization. One good mechanism for that is to be a political party, and Chris speaks from the Pirate Party and says that because of the Pirate Party it allows him to be a more effective activist. That would be interesting to hear more about. Maybe a couple more from the list. Didier talks about, he emphasizes the part about human and non-human rights, and thinks that we should be emphasizing equality more there. The same roughly as I heard Darren speaking about at the beginning, I think. They need to emphasize equality. And maybe that's the last one with the positive set of votes so far. But panelists, feel free to dip into any of the other questions if you like. So, Darren, if I hand the baton back to you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thanks to everybody for all those contributions. It's been delightful listening to everybody. As we're short of time, I'm just going to pick out one thing that I really would like us to discuss, and that is whether we think our interests will be best served by having both a campaigning organisation that is party politically neutral and separately having a transhumanist party that stands candidates for election. The reason I suggest that is that there will be times when we want to try to influence the other parties. And what tends to happen in politics is as soon as you have a politician from a particular party with a particular label putting forward an agenda, instantly anyone else in party politics disagrees with you because you're the other guys, you're bad, you must be wrong. The only way for them to be right is if you're wrong. That doesn't tend to happen with campaigning organisations as much. So you can have an independent campaigning organisation, a think tank quite often, that has an opinion that can be put to the political parties, and you may find that several of them will agree with it where they wouldn't be prepared to agree with each other. So for me, that's number one that I think we should talk about.
What's your proposal in that? Do you think we should do both?
Yes, I do. So earlier I was talking about approaching candidates and MPs in the 2015 general election to get them to make statements supporting particular aspects of our campaign. That would become a great deal more difficult if the people asking them to do that were competitors in the election.
So that's suggesting we shouldn't be competitors, we should be supporting.
I think we should be both. So okay. We should have a campaigning organisation that's independent of the political party. I know that's doubling the amount of work that has to be done. Obviously I recognise resources are an issue, who's going to do all of this. But in an ideal world, that's what I think we would have. A campaigning organisation that is free to approach any of the other political parties and attempt to influence them. And even, to have very close links with individuals who are prepared to stand for election themselves within those other political parties. And then separately, to have a transhumanist political party that in the long term, and I do think this is a really long-term project, in the long term, is prepared to put its own candidates forward into that agenda.
Many thanks, Darren. Don't go away. You might have a chance to chip in at the very end. So, voting for doing twice as much work. Let's see what others have got to say. Alex, what's your final takeaway comments?
Two organisations, ouch, is all I could say. I mean, I agree, it would be probably beneficial, but who would manage such a thing would be, obviously, as Amon said earlier, I nominate yourself. Not to put anyone on the spot. As for the think tank part of it, I mean, I think that could work more effectively than a party. I don't know much about party politics, so I wouldn't know how to go about approaching such a thing. But the actual think tank / pressure group, I think that could be something beneficial and something that I could certainly take a lot of part in. I would just like to answer, or not answer, but at least talk around the whole issue of, if I can just pull it up for a second, which one is it? The human and non-human rights. I agree, obviously, that something needs to be done on this issue, and obviously we should have something in there. However, I'm not entirely sure how we would approach this. Now, you want equality for all sentient species. Now, obviously, definitions of sentience, consciousness, and so forth are, 10 a penny, and no one knows what it is, etc., etc., except that we have it. Now, if you're going to say there was a recent chimpanzee was given some civil rights, if you offer them total equality, does it not therefore behoove us ethically to uplift said species so they can actually take advantage of the rights that we're going to give them? Which is why I'm kind of like a bit woolly on that whole issue within the documents. However, I do believe it should be there. Obviously, everything else has been covered by everybody else, to be quite honest. 10 issues, focus on them, expand upon them, obviously change the language to be more politically, not correct, but friendly and approachable to various groups. That would be my take home.
Great. More zing and more gravitas, and let's take it from there. Amnen, what's your final comments or any answers to any of the questions that have been raised?
Yeah, I think this has been very useful. I think we all agree that we want to focus on practical and achievable goals within the time frame we have. I tried to make some notes of the agreements that seem to have arose. There seems to be an agreement that there isn't much time until 2015, and at most we can squeeze in a couple of questions to MPs, which bring us to the public knowledge, and maybe we can have a political candidate for 2019. The other agreement that seems to arise is that we need to separate the campaigning and maybe public relations from the political party. In the longer term, I mean, if what we're doing here is special, so we want to think carefully about what we're called, because Transhumanist Manifesto represents what we really are at the moment. Maybe not so in 20 years' time, when people are already transhumans. We are also techno-progressive.
So there's the question, is this a transhumanist party, or should it be a techno-progressive party or a technology party? I think the precedent is the transhumanist party is established in the US. It's getting some media publicity. That's the argument to use this fine word. So we can discuss that too. Many thanks, Amnen. Let's give Durk a chance to speak. Durk's been listening very patiently. What's your takeaways on everything you've heard, Durk?
So, you're the party of robot rights, and I've only one question for you. Are chimps going to be our masters? And I think that will close down the debate.
So you don't think we should say anything about that?
No, it's from an ordinary person's point of view, it's laughable and ludicrous that it can be made that way, even if it isn't. So it's probably a bad idea. Second, the reason we're here is because Zoltan has acted. He's actually doing something in the real world. It's not another Facebook page. It's not another set of, we got 200 likes, so we're moving forward. It's not something in the transhumanist ghetto where we all try and poach each other's members. It's something in the real world. He's standing for president. And if we don't actually put up a candidate, then I don't see what the point is. It's just more ghetto-based mutual masturbation.
Well, I think we could achieve things, but if we wrote down the policies that we wanted people to adopt, and if you saw other people adopting them and eventually being acted in Parliament, that's a success.
Well, it is, but on the other hand, we're just one of many. And one of many who are not actually trying to... The only way you influence politicians, ultimately, is to take money from them or take votes from them.
Yeah.
And we're doing neither.
But we could raise an environment in which the people have to change their policies in order to retain votes. We can make things very popular. We can get more and more people speaking up and saying, this longevity thing's important. I'd like it. And so therefore the politicians have to accept it.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, something that surprised me, because I go to the comments page of both the Guardian and the Daily Mail, which are like polar opposites. And on, for example, the drugs issue, they're both in agreement. The majority of the comments are drugs should be legalized, but motivations are different. The Guardians see it as freedom of choice. The Daily Mail readers see it, let the fuckers kill themselves, basically. But the fact is that probably most people would agree on legalizing drugs, but that is not on the table, and it won't be on the table.
Okay.
We don't live in a democracy. It's as simple as that, and I don't think we can exert enough pressure in the short term to do anything, unless we actually look like we're going to do something in the real world. It's just more talk.
Okay. So what is your recommendation for what we should do in the real world?
I think we should stand one MP in the London constituency, and we do all the PR stuff necessary, just as a test. If nothing else, it's a real act.
Okay, there's a real proposal. One candidate for one MP in one constituency, and it would get some attention. Great.
It'll certainly get more attention than sending a manifesto to a newspaper.
Thanks, Dirk. Let's move on. Julian, are you prepared to be that politician, Julian, or what?
Well, not where I am, living out in the middle of Norfolk. I think it needs somebody a bit close to central London to do that. But I must say I do completely agree with Dirk. I think I said that in my first point, that a candidate in the real world will get a lot more focus of attention on us than just doing a lot of paperwork and pushing ideas at politicians. Quite whether we can do that in the time span, I don't know. I think I've been reading the comments down the side. I think Darren's been saying that he's on the list to be a Lib Dem candidate, and we might be able to do something with him if he goes in as a Lib Dem stroke transhumanist candidate. As the one person in the group here with the most political experience, that's probably another possibility. I don't know whether Dirk think about that as well. On another couple of points, I'll just go through. I've written down. I like Voldemar's idea about the language. If we do need to sell our ideas to the other political parties, then definitely we need to change the language. Depending on whether we're selling it to a Conservative or to a Labour voter or a Conservative or Labour politician. We might have to do something like picking 2 or 3 of our most prominent policies and ideas rather than go through the whole 9. But it definitely does need a little bit of concentration on how we improve the language to sell those ideas. And finally, just on the Q&As, just pick up the one that was mentioned about space exploration. I think it is an important part, but I think that will come down under the existential risk mitigation of. It's even been brought up by Stephen Hawking fairly recently, hasn't it, saying that unless we can actually get people off planet sometime in the non-too-distant future, we do actually stand a great risk of being exterminated by a meteor or any great sort of an Ebola out of control, all that sort of thing. So I think it is important, but I think it comes under existential risk on our list.
Okay. So you've got one more thing you want to add in, which is space, and you want to cut down from 10 to 3 so that we can have a clearer message. Maybe that's a bit unfair, but we all do need to think. What are if we can only have time to explain to journalists or to people on the doorstep 2 or 3 proposals, which 2 or 3 should it be?
Exactly.
Great. Thanks, Julian. Let's move on to Eamon.
Okay.
Closing thoughts?
Yeah, just three things that have already been said by other people. I just wanted to stress how much I agree with them. The first was I emphatically agree with what Darren was saying, that I think I completely agree that we should be doing both options on different time scales. So approaching influencing other parties, that kind of thing, on the one hand, and on the other hand, running our own candidates. But at the same time, then to move on, the second person I agree with, I completely agree with Dirk that we should be putting up one candidate. So I suppose in terms of the party side of things, running candidates, we'd start with one as a test case, with the intention in the long term of building up a full party. So I think those two things are compatible. I think you can start with one test case now, but make the whole mechanism that was up candidates be something you expect to build slowly over time, whereas you expect more, maybe not actually noticeable, but more real change to come from influencing politicians and other parties and so on in the short term. The last thing, I noticed that all of us in the chat that the speakers can see, all of us pretty much universally agreed with what Valdemar was saying about tailoring messages, that we can have a set of core points, but when we're communicating them to different audiences, we've got to bear in mind what kind of things those audiences are going to want to hear and how they're going to want to hear them. I don't think there was anyone who said they disagreed with Valdemar. There was a lot of vigorous nodding going on. So quick recap from me. I would say yes, we want campaigners and an actual party, two different organisations related. That the party should be starting out by trying to put together one candidate as an MP. I wouldn't have thought for 2015 that we'd be running a few years late for that, but soon. And definitely a big yes to carefully tailoring our messages.
Thanks, Eamon. I'm going to turn to Michael in a minute. I'll just read another one of the questions that have popped up. It's more a comment by Mark Larkenta, who says, look, things may take time, but eventually they do change. 20 years ago, the phrase marriage equality did not exist in the US in terms of marriage being for more than just heterosexual couples. Now it is almost the law of the land. Stubborn commitment does work. So some of the topics that we think today may be laughable can become much less laughable if we are confident enough in the essential rightness of the idea. Let's move on to Michael. What's your takeaway at the end from everything you've heard, or if there's anything you want to answer from questions?
Well, I think one of the most important points is that we actually tailor our messages to different audiences. I think this is so important that we should actually try to make a set of different manifestos rather than a single one. Perhaps one manifesto more on the more economic points, one more for the more social aspects, and well, target different audiences with each version. But let me discuss some economic points. I think it's really important to strengthen the economy in any way that is possible and feasible. And I think there is a big opportunity to make a lot of things right with basic income, with a universal basic income, if we can do it right. And that is the really difficult part, because we have no experiences with that, no long-term experiences. So I think the first nation that does this right will have tremendous benefits from the innovation that basic income can spur and support. So perhaps it would be good to suggest making lots of local experiments so we can get some experience and results to find out how to do this really right. And if we can do that, the economy would benefit a lot, I think.
So, more research into how big might work. Basic income guarantee.
And the last point I want to talk about is space. Space is not only important for existential risk. I think what's more important in the short to medium term is that it might be good for the economy if we can actually create a space industry with space-based solar power, with asteroid mining and things like that. The initial costs will be immense, but if we can pull it off, the returns will be really great.
like what Peter Diamandis is doing with his asteroid mining company.
Right.
Interesting suggestion. So maybe we should be elevating that higher up in the document. Thanks, Michael. I'd like to come now to Valdemar for your comments on what you've heard and anything else that's come to your mind listening to the discussion.
Discussing specific technologies is, of course, more difficult because some transhumanists might start to discuss that biotechnology and the development of GMOs is more important. Others might start to talk about nanotechnology and that we really need hard and very powerful nanotechnology. I think it's better to start discussing in more general terms, both for a general policy discussion that you're having with interested parties such as politicians and NGOs, corporations, but also to the general public. Remember, transhumanism is more mainstream than ever. Many in the public has experience with plastic surgery, IT, or at least efforts to cure cancer are viewed positively. Actually, the views of parties such as Labour or the Conservatives might not be as mainstream as they once were. And I think this is shown in the rise of the Pirate Party. How did they gather votes? Well, it wasn't that 7% of Sweden's population was made up by computer geeks, but they were able to tap into some of the dissatisfied vote. They were able to find out an important issue with quite a broad appeal, like file sharing. It requires some fingertip feeling, Fingerspitzgefühl, to find out these issues, and with some political experience to boot. And I think it's important to see, well, elected transhumanists such as Vatino in Italy or Rosenblatt that stood for election in the US. What are their experiences? You could learn a lot from them. So I think it's important to perhaps not point to specific technologies that could be the most important, because there's going to be discussion in the transhumanist community over them, but also that not all in the general public know about them. A more general vision of that a better world is possible and that many of the economic troubles afflicting you now could be solved for the better. I think it's easier to communicate with a more general wording.
Great, many thanks. So lots of points there as well. What should be our equivalent of file sharing? File sharing was the killer app, in a sense, for the Pirate Party. We're almost out of time. In fact, we have gone beyond time. I'll just give a couple of very short comments to anybody who needs to say anything at the end. Durk.
Okay, just something I mentioned in the comments, but I'll say aloud here. In Zero State, we have several thousand members, and the question that I'm asked most of the time is, what can I do? And I can't point people at mass projects. You know, if we wanted people to go around pushing envelopes through doors, we could probably do it. But the kind of projects we are engaged in are very, very high tech, very small, quite commercial. So you know that you can't have a mass of people piling into them. But something like a political party or political organisation, then you can. I mean, we have all these willing hands going to waste, essentially.
I feel the same a lot myself. I often think there's lots of volunteers who say they're going to do things. Maybe only 10% of them would do something, but even the 10% often they don't have anything that we can point them at.
Maybe, David, if I can jump in for a moment. If there's going to be a candidate in an election, by God, there will be plenty of things for people to do. Whether it's stuffing envelopes, shoving them through letterboxes, writing copy, taking photographs, putting leaflets, there's just so much that needs doing. I mean, you could keep 100 people busy full time if you wanted to. So, you know, there's going to be no shortage of work if there's going to be an election.
Is there any other project, mass project, that could utilize the willing discretionary time of this potential group of volunteers?
Well, I would say that the obvious thing to do is get them all delivering leaflets. I mean, that's it.
All right. So that's the final takeaway. There's been a fascinating discussion. I've got lots and lots of notes, which I'm going to need time to get my head around. We are getting a lot of thumbs up on the overall direction, and lots of ideas on how to take it forward. So thanks to everybody for that. And we're going to have more hangouts soon, I'm sure, on particular aspects of this, with maybe a different bunch of people taking part. And I really look forward to seeing how this is going to evolve, not just in the UK, but I think there's lots of scope for simultaneous things happening overseas, in Europe, elsewhere too. So let's find the ways in which we can each inspire and encourage the others. Thanks all. See you around.